So, when you think of Australia, what comes to mind? Probably sunshine, a laid back attitude, and a really stable, successful democracy, right? I mean, it's called the lucky country for a reason. But what if I told you that famous nickname was never, ever meant to be a compliment?
Yeah, let's dive into that. You see, the guy who came up with the phrase Donald Horne was actually making a pretty sharp criticism way back in 1964. His whole point was that Australia's success wasn't built on smarts or great leadership. Nope. He said it was built on pure luck. Tons of natural resources and inheriting all these solid British institutions. He was basically warning everyone that one day that luck might just run out.
And that really gets to the heart of what we're going to unpack here. We're going to explore two really powerful and totally contradictory stories about Australian democracy to try and figure out what's really going on down under. All right, so first, let's build the case for Australia being a model for the rest of the world. And we're going to start with its most famous and, honestly, its most incredible democratic feature. Just look at that number, over 90%. Since Australia made voting compulsory all the way back in 1924, voter turnout has pretty much always been over 90%. Now, just to put that into perspective, in places like the US and the UK where voting is voluntary, they're lucky to get around 60 to 65%. This level of participation is, well, it's almost unheard of in other major democracies. It's wild. And look, this isn't some new thing. Australia has been a true pioneer in this stuff for a long, long time. They brought in the secret ballot, which literally became known around the world as the Australian ballot, way back in the 1850s. Then in 1894, they became the first country on Earth to give women the right to not only vote, but also to stand for parliament. They were way ahead of the curve. Okay, so all this democratic stability, it pays off. Big time. It translates into incredible economic success. Just look at this 2017 data. The average wealth for an adult in Australia is higher than in the US, the UK, and Germany. But here's the really crucial part. See that Gini coefficient? That's just a fancy way of measuring inequality. And the main thing to know is a lower number is better. It means the country's wealth is spread out way more evenly than in most other comparable nations. And this success isn't just about digging stuff out of the ground. That whole lucky country critique kind of misses the fact that Australia is an innovation powerhouse. I mean, we are talking about inventions that changed the world, developed right there. The Wi-Fi you're probably using right now, the tech behind Google Maps, the medical ultrasound, these all have Australian roots. That sounds like a clever country, not just a lucky one. It's a pretty convincing picture, isn't it? Stable, everyone participates, it's wealthy, it's equal, it's innovative. But this is where the story takes a really sharp turn. What if, underneath all of that amazing success, the very foundation of Australian democracy has a massive crack in it? Okay, so now we have to look at the powerful counter-argument, the idea that Australia's democracy is constitutionally weak and that it leaves its own people surprisingly vulnerable. This right here, this gets to the absolute core of the paradox. In Australia, you are legally required to vote. You have to participate. And yet, Australia is one of the only established democracies in the entire world that does not have a national Bill of Rights. That means basic freedoms, things like free speech and the right to protest, they aren't actually protected in the Constitution from government overreach. And this wasn't an accident, some kind of oversight. It was baked in right from the start. As the scholar Mark Francis points out, when the Constitution was written, Australians were seen as subjects of the British Crown, not as citizens who had their own inherent rights. The thinking was, hey, we have a democratically elected parliament. That'll be enough to protect everyone's freedoms. But a lot of critics are now arguing that in the 21st century, that assumption just doesn't hold up. Without that constitutional safety net, they say, we've seen a whole series of laws that have slowly chipped away at civil liberties. We're talking about expanded government surveillance powers, new laws that make it harder to protest publicly, really tough laws against whistleblowers, and even gag clauses that stop charities from speaking out if they get government funding. So you've got this tug of war between two competing realities, a super high-functioning democracy on one hand and a constitutionally weak one on the other. This tension, it was put to the ultimate test during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, to really understand what happened, we need to get this one key concept from some Australian researchers, bounded authority. It sounds a bit academic, I know, but it's actually really simple. Just think of it as the public's own idea of what the rightful limits of government power are. It's that invisible line in the sand where people start to feel like the authorities have just gone too far, even if what they're doing is technically legal. And here's what the research found, which is fascinating. During the pandemic, whenever Australians felt that the authorities crossed that invisible line, with things like really heavy-handed policing or intrusive surveillance, their concerns about this bounded authority started to rise. And as those concerns grew, their moral obligation to actually obey the rules, it went down. Trust was the absolute tipping. So the pandemic basically shone a giant spotlight on this fundamental fault line in Australian democracy. It forced this huge question out into the open. In a crisis, how do you balance public safety against individual rights when those rights aren't even written down and guaranteed in the first place?
So where does all this leave us? I mean, what's the final verdict? Well, the reality is there's no easy answer to the question we started with, because the evidence points in two totally different directions at the same time.
It's almost like there are two Australias. On one side, you have this exemplary democracy that really is the envy of the world. It's stable, it's wealthy, and people participate. But on the other side, you have a democracy that's at risk, one that's missing those fundamental protections and has shown it can be worryingly tolerant of growing state power. And the thing is, both of these statements are true.
But maybe the answer is in this idea from the political scientist Guillermo O'Donnell. He argued that democracy isn't a finished product. You don't just achieve it and you're done. He said its true nature is that it's always open. It's always being fought over, debated, and redefined. So from that point of view, the Australian paradox isn't a sign of failure. It's just a reflection of democracy's constant, messy, unfinished struggle.
And all of this leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question to think about. What truly makes a democracy strong? Is it the formal rules and the rights you write down in a constitution? Or is it the informal trust and the shared values that you build between citizens and their government day in and day out? Australia's ongoing experiment doesn't give us a clear answer, and it forces all of us to think about what we value most.